In 1960, director Billy Wilder and star Jack Lemmon gave the world a peek into the sleazy world of high-class Manhattan.
In 2021, we returned to the Isla region for a single malt scotch.
The film is The Apartment.
The whiskey is Bunnahabhain 12.
And we'll review them both. This is
The Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 1960 Best Picture winner, Billy Wilder's The Apartment. Brad, I have been waiting to talk about this movie for years, and I purposely did not put it in our first few seasons because you're still a wild card, man. You're such a wild card. I never know what you're going to think of a movie.
The way you said that, have you just never spoken of this movie a single time? You've just watched it and then in silence.
I've just been running down the
journaled
street.
Your thoughts.
I've been running down the street just shaking people and saying, "Have you seen it? Have you seen The Apartment?" No, honestly, Brad, this is one of my favorite films of all time. And watching it again, I haven't watched it since we started doing the podcast because I wanted to wait and watch it with a more critical eye again. I can't wait to get into talking about it. I sincerely hope you liked it. But before we get into any of those questions, the most important question, Brad, had you heard of the movie The Apartment prior to watching it for our podcast?
Bro, you've got me on 2 weeks in a row of movies that I'd never even heard of.
Man, I'm kind of surprised you hadn't heard of this one, especially since you have been such a big fan of the two Billy Wilder movies that we've done to this point. I thought maybe you would have gone and kind of looked through his filmography at some point. But,
bro, what do you take
minimal effort.
Some sort of cinephile?
D's get degrees.
Dude. All I got to say, man, is we got the same piece of papers.
That's right, man. All right, so you had not even heard of The Apartment. I'm really glad that you went into this kind of cold. And I am waiting with bated breath to hear what you thought of it, Brad. Why don't you just give us kind of initial impressions on the movie? What'd you think of it?
If All About Eve is one of the most underwhelming Best Picture winners ever, I would have to put The Apartment in probably the top 20 to 30% of Best Picture winners I've ever seen.
There you go.
It's solid. I can 100% understand why this won Best Picture. I think if you put it up against some of the other greats, it would clearly lose. But in a year where, obviously, I don't know what the heck was going on in cinema in 1960, but in a year where there weren't any other massive contenders, I think it's just one of the best filmed comedic dramas I've ever seen in my life. And more emphasis on the drama.
Mm-hmm.
The comedic elements just barely lighten it up enough to make it almost feel like real life.
Yeah.
More than a drama. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And Brad, I don't want to correct you right off the bat here, but you did have some idea of what was going on in cinema in the year 1960 because you and I watched Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho just last season. And that was the other, kind of really big, popular, controversial movie that came out in the year 1960. So,
this is better than Psycho.
Just looking at those two movies side by side, I really do think that this might be kind of an underrated year for cinema in terms of really kind of pushing the medium forward and talking about things that hadn't been talked about. Just from Some Like It Hot to this movie, I feel like Billy Wilder really took a deep dive into some themes that you just didn't see explored in mainstream entertainment in that time period.
Yeah, I mean, you're jumping in here with really heavy themes of infidelity, of suicide, of a man trying to con his way to the top, I guess. And you just see all of these things kind of crashing into one another, all in order to tell a simple love story. But I just can't imagine this coming out in 1960. Honestly, Bob, as I was watching this, I had two main thoughts, and I'll get to the second one eventually. But my first main thought was this. If you have ever watched the TV show Mad Men, The entire show was based off of this movie. Bob, have you ever watched Mad Men?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tell me that I'm wrong.
No, I
the
mean,
whole show was based off this
film.
The
whole vibe is just, it's right here. The blueprint was laid.
Yeah, and so I think that what you see here is, I don't want to call it like an expose, but I think that what Wilder was doing was just this criticism of like men who are in power and think that they can get whatever they want. And he did that by putting this unassuming, nice guy kind of against them. And in the end, the nice guy wins.
Yeah.
And he's not a sleazeball, and he gets the girl. And it's just a really cute, unique, and surprisingly deep film.
Well, before we get any further, Brad, because my sneaking suspicion will be that not many people will have seen this movie coming into listening to this episode. And I already would wholeheartedly say, go watch this movie. You will not be disappointed. I think this is the kind of movie, even like you said, Brad, that you may not come away from it loving it as much as I do, where I'm ranking it in like my top 10 favorite movies ever. But I don't really know of anyone that would watch this movie and walk away not having been entertained. This just seems like a crowd-pleasing kind of movie.
Yeah, for a movie that deals with like incredibly deep subjects and honestly is almost gratuitous in the way that it shows it for 1960, which really I would say for 1950s cinema, like I would say this is one of the more entertaining films we've watched in a while.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like now it's 61 years old, and I feel like some of these scenes, especially, I mean, truly hold up in 2021. And we'll get to a pretty harrowing sequence later on, but it reminded me of a movie that is more recent, and I think actually this movie may have done it better. But before we get into all that, it is time for us to talk Brad Explains. This is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. Obviously, that is the case today. Brad, as you know, we have implemented a strict 60-second timer on Brad Explains this year. Can you walk us through the plot of the movie, The Apartment, in under 1 minute?
Jack Lemmon is a nice guy. Fred McMurray is a dick. Shirley MacLaine is in love with the dick, and he ruins her life. She tries to commit suicide. Jack Lemmon saves her. They fall in love. Woo!
All right, you did it in 15 seconds. Now I'm gonna require you to go a bit deeper. Because one of the big parts of this movie is the kind of, like you said, I don't want to say expose or even satire, but the portrayal of corporate America in the late 1950s, early 60s. Like, I don't think you can really talk about this movie without talking about the endless rows and rows of desks on this floor that Jack Lemmon's character, Baxter, works on. Like, the idea of corporate America and these upper level executives who think they're entitled to everything really kind of permeates the whole movie.
Oh, yeah, no, I called him a dick. I thought we all knew that was just like code for corporate America.
Corporate America, yeah, right.
Come on, man.
Absolutely.
No, I think that I don't know, as somebody in 2021 watching this film, I feel like it's almost just taken for granted that like high-powered business executives are just like either like average to terrible people. Like, I don't know if there's any of them that are really that good. And so there's already such a distrust of corporate America on the average citizen's end that I do feel like it dulls the edge of this movie a little bit. But I can appreciate the fact that this is probably one of the first like honest attempts at saying, hey, like, this isn't okay. Like, all of these people who are working in this company are real people. And just because you guys can go and have your lover's trysts at this dude's apartment because he's a bachelor doesn't make him worth promoting. It doesn't make you guys good people. Like, it's just all bad, all around.
Brad, as always, you continue to be incredibly eloquent. It bad, all bad.
It's bad, bro.
It bad. All right, so I do want to jump in here and kind of round out Brad Explains a little bit. So the essential plot of the movie is that Jack Lemmon's character, Baxter, is kind of a lower level employee working for this giant insurance firm in New York City. And he is climbing the corporate ladder by allowing his superiors and people in administration in this building to use his apartment to have affairs in. He is lending out his key. And what I really love about the place that the movie starts, Brad, is that you can tell from the beginning of this movie that we are coming into this situation when it's already spiraling out of control. Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't see the first time Jack Lemmon kind of gives his apartment over to somebody. We don't see that slippery slope. We see Jack Lemmon, you know, even though the opening narration where he's talking about how his apartment's so great for a bachelor and he sounds so chipper, but the way they're framing it with the camera is this incredibly lonely, like there's just an expanse around him, and Jack Lemmon is just walking down the street with no one around him. And you can tell that he is already feeling this intense loneliness and regret for what he's doing with his apartment, to the point where, you know, he's basically been kicked out of his own apartment because his boss needs to, you know, have an affair, and he ends up sleeping on a park bench. And I really like that Wilder allows us as the audience to be dropped right into that situation when it's already falling apart, and not have to feel like he needs to walk us through and give us, you know, tip us off at every instance. Like, oh, this is bad. Like, you can just tell from the beginning, this guy is in over his head.
One might say that he drops us in media res.
That's very true.
Boom.
Brad learned a Latin phrase today.
Hey, man, I learned that like a while ago. No, I love one of my favorite parts about the opening and ending of this film. I love whenever a movie bookends things, right?
Yeah.
And I love that at the start of this film, you see Jack Lemmon get the wrong key. You know, the dude leaves the wrong key, and it's actually the key to the executive washroom. But like, he gets this key, and it's almost like a symbol of like, well, one day I'll have this key, and it won't just be accidentally left underneath, you know, my carpet. And at the end of the film, what happens? He gives him the key to the executive washroom back so that he can win his love.
Yeah.
And I loved how they bookended this movie with that, you know, kind of plot device, if you will.
Brad, I feel like we are slowly revealing tidbits of information about this film to our listeners. So, and I feel like we should probably just go ahead and completely spoil the whole thing. You know, we do spoilers on this podcast. So if we haven't already given away enough, we're going to go ahead and just give the whole thing away here. Jack Lemmon is kind of secretly pining for, has a crush on, the elevator girl played by Shirley MacLaine. Her name is Miss Kubelik. And unbeknownst to Jack Lemmon, one of the most senior executives in the building, the guy who's in charge of personnel, essentially the HR, vice president of this company, is having an affair with Miss Kubelik. And you come to find it out about halfway through the movie. It all kind of clicks into place for Baxter. And the second half of the movie is him dealing with the fallout of, for lack of a better term, you know, aiding and abetting this affair. Not just, you know, the fallout for himself and his emotions, but the fallout in terms of what's happening with Fran, Miss Kubelik, internally. And by the end of the film, you know, he quits the job, he gets the girl, like everything gets patched up. But Brad, you even texted me at one point today and said you were about halfway through the movie, and you were right at the scene that I think is maybe the most crucial and pivotal scene of the whole movie. And what happens is Jack Lemmon allows his boss to use the apartment for an affair. He finds a little pocket mirror that has been left behind, and he returns it to his boss, Sheldrake, played by Fred McMurray. And a few days after that, they're having the office Christmas party, and he shows Miss Kubelik his brand new office because he keeps getting promoted miraculously. And he's saying, you know, look at this incredible office that I have. And she pulls out this pocket mirror, and he recognizes that it's hers because it's cracked down the middle. And it all clicks into place for him. He didn't know that she was the one that his boss was having an affair with. She doesn't know that he is the one whose apartment she was in.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here, Bob, is just an amazing script, right? And, you know, they're talking, and he's shown her his office, and he sees this, and he kind of, you can see his entire tone shift, you know, which, once again, one of the signs of a great actor is their ability to move, like, facially from one emotion to the other. And you see him, like almost audibly shift in this tone to, like, sadness and realization. And she kind of asks him, well, what's wrong? And he tries to catch himself. He goes, oh, well, your mirror, it's broken. And she goes, yes, I know. I like it that way. It makes me look the way I feel. And it's just little moments like that throughout this film that, like, they're not funny. They're dramatic. Like, obviously Wilder's known for his comedy and, something like Some Like It Hot. It just cuts to the core.
Mm-hmm.
You see the depth of sadness in Fran's heart and in her self-image and in her understanding of who she is. And you just feel that desire that Jack Lemmon has to like figure out what the heck is going on.
Absolutely.
And you feel these two different people having two different tensions, right? Because Fran is finding out that her lover and boss is actually just a serial, romanticizer and has had tons of flings. And Baxter is finding out that his crush has been taken in by an older sleazeball, and neither of them know what to do about it, and they awkwardly leave the room. And it's just pitch perfect. Best scene of the film.
I want to touch on a couple things that you said, Brad, but the first thing that keeps coming to my mind is the way that Billy Wilder draws out and really makes clear to the audience the kind of pervading sense of loneliness in this movie. And, I talked about it with Baxter a little bit. Obviously, Fran, played by Shirley MacLaine, is feeling it as well. But I think that everything in this movie really highlights the fact that these are two very lonely people. And that by the time that you get to like that big office party scene, he has done such a good job of establishing their motivations that you notice the contrast between everybody outside of Baxter's office door who are having this like raucous, debaucherous party, and the fact that these two people can be standing right next to that, and they are still so profoundly alone.
I think that Scorsese might have something to say about, that looking like a debaucherous party, because for him, this is like the most tame thing.
That's very true.
Spread.
That's very true. I would like to see this mashed up with Wolf of Wall Street somehow.
I was going to say that's an easy mashup that you could do.
Yeah, Brad, I mean, I was really struck by the cinematography in this movie. It was shot in black and white on purpose at a time when most movies were being shot in color. I think it really does kind of continue to highlight, like I said, the loneliness of these characters. They went super wide with the widescreen, and I think that was intentional as well. I don't know, Brad, did you find that the photography, the cinematography stuck out to you?
I think one of my favorite scenes was literally the very opening one when you see Baxter working, and then you slowly cut from one scene of him and everybody bustling around him to him by himself with empty row after row after row. Like, obviously, a lot of different movies have used that trick of the mindless drone, and you show, row after row of secretaries working or like assembly workers at a factory, and you just, show them mindlessly working. But I feel like this was one of the most beautiful ones because it hones so deeply in on Jack Lemmon and just his predicament in life of being a nobody.
And Brad, I think that we should talk about the three main performances in this movie. And since we're already talking about Jack Lemmon, let's dive into his performance here. I have to say, Jack Lemmon is one of my favorite actors of all time. And part of that is because for as incredible of an actor as he is, he always seems authentically Jack Lemmon. I don't know how else to phrase it. It's kind of like Tom Hanks, where, you will suspend disbelief to watch him be, Captain Sully or Captain Phillips or whoever it might be in these movies that you're watching. But at the end of the day, you trust him, know him because he is Tom Hanks, and you have this attachment to him. And with Jack Lemmon, by all accounts, he was as authentic of a person in real life as he was, playing a character like Baxter. And I think that authenticity, that earnestness really, really helps him here in this performance.
Please, Miss Kubelik, you gotta promise me you won't do anything foolish.
Who'd care?
I would.
Why can't I ever fall in love with somebody nice like you?
Yeah, well, that's the way it crumbles, cookie-wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we mentioned the script for a minute here, that this is like a really witty and sharp script, but I don't think that it would go anywhere if it wasn't for the performance of Jack Lemmon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and there's so many little moments throughout the film, but when he was in his bathroom after Shirley MacLaine has attempted suicide, and you see him slowly like grabbing things that she could try and kill herself with and like hiding them. And you see him keep looking back into the room with care, and you just feel the seriousness of the situation, you know? And as somebody who has had friends who have desired to commit suicide and have attempted, like, for me in that moment watching him, I understood him.
Yeah.
I understood that motivation of, I just want to care for my friend. And I think that's one of the most important things in this movie is that Baxter really views Fran as a friend and potential love interest. And it's not just a love interest. I don't know. Did you get that sense?
Yeah, for sure. And Jack Lemmon is one of the few actors that I think can really go from being kind of this lovable, I don't want to say clown, but, you know, there are moments where he's being goofball. Yeah. I mean, but there are moments where he's being very performative, even for the people in the movie. Like when he's trying to cheer up Shirley MacLaine and he's cooking spaghetti and straining it through a tennis racket and, you know, humming a fake little Italian song. And then there's moments where, you know, you watch him in just this state of despondency where he's drinking himself into a stupor in a bar, and it's all completely believable. And even from one scene to the next, like, you know, that scene where he's in the office with Fran Kubelik and he finds the mirror, or, you know, she pulls out the mirror. Right before that, he decides he wants to model this dumb hat that he got for himself. And it's like, it's the best little sight gag in the whole movie because the hat looks horrible. And he stands there with this bowler on his head and he holds it for a beat. And she's clearly not into it because she's thinking about how heartbroken she is. And it really highlights not just how Billy Wilder is able to balance, you know, the comedy and the tragedy so effortlessly, but like you said, how much he had to rely on Jack Lemmon to make those transitions so seamless.
Well, I think the best way to illustrate this is to contrast it with Some Like It Hot. Like, the beauty of Some Like It Hot is that the comedy steers, like, it just veers right into the absurd, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just over the top and ridiculous, and you have Jack Lemmon at the height of his powers just being flat out funny. And the difference of this movie is that his comedy is always grounded in reality. Like, tell me that you couldn't imagine some bachelor using a tennis racket to strain his spaghetti. Like, it's 100% believable. And the way he does it is charming and relaxed. And you can feel this sense of like, oh, well, like, I'm in my element. I'm in my home. I'm caring for a woman that I see as a friend and as somebody I kind of like. And I just, everything about his performance kept the core of the movie, which is this drama of, you know, Fran and her desire to find love. Everything about his performance keeps that feeling real. And if he had veered into the absurd at all, you know, which credit to Billy Wilder for directing him well, that if he had gone over the top in an instant, I think it would have discredited the entire, like, core of the film.
Yeah. And countering him, you know, or balancing him out, I guess, in some ways, is Shirley MacLaine as Fran. She is 26 years old in this movie. She's only been acting in movies for 5 years at this point. She is kind of a really quickly ascending star in Hollywood. And watching this movie this time, Brad, I've probably seen this movie 10 times through. I have always been blown away by Jack Lemmon. Watching it this time, I was like, how did I miss how incredible she is in this movie? Because she is acting in such a naturalistic way that I forgot at many points of the movie that I was watching someone pretend to be somebody else. She so perfectly embodies this heartbroken, depressed person. And every single line reading that she does is so authentic. And not only that, but she knows to not be showy about any of it. And she knows that, you know, Jack Lemmon has the sillier, more showy performance in this movie. And so she has to balance him out by being a little more subdued. And honestly, it's not the kind of performance that you really take note of unless you have seen the movie a few times, I feel like. And this time through, I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, this might be one of the best female performances I've ever seen in a movie. And I have been overlooking it all these years.
No, he just walked out on me. Quit. Threw that big fat job right in my face.
The nerve.
Yeah, little punk. After all I did for him. Said I couldn't bring anybody to the apartment, especially not Miss Kubelik. What's he got against you anyway?
I don't know. I guess that's the way it crumbles. Cookie-wise.
What are you talking about?
I'd spell it out for you, only I can't spell.
Well, you know what it was, Bob? It's the fact that in a time where it feels like every single movie was trying to make their female leads a Marilyn Monroe, you know, and I say this with all respect because I actually really like Marilyn Monroe in her movies, but they're trying to make their leads ditzy and dumb, and not only their leads, but I feel like women were portrayed in a pretty terrible way in general as being just ridiculously stupid and unaware of men's intentions with them and just buying any lie that they were fed. I think that Shirley MacLaine in this film portrays a more real woman who was caught up in the lies of a manipulative just jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And you get the sense that she's a real girl. You don't ever get the sense that she is fake in any way. And honestly, Bob, I've talked about this before on the podcast. Authenticity. I think that's what you're looking for in a lot of different films. And in this one, you have two characters that just come across so perfectly authentic of being who they are going to be. Shirley MacLaine knocks it out of the freaking park in this movie. And I really think one of my favorite scenes for her is the very final one where she comes into Jack Lemmon's apartment and just matter-of-factly starts playing gin rummy. And like she's kind of playing coy, kind of playing hard to get, even though he knows for 100% that he has her. And when she doesn't answer him when he says that I love you, it's just this like fun, playful little acknowledgement of like, yeah, I know you love me. Let's play some gin rummy. It's just perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching little moments like when Sheldrake, her boss, or, you know, the executive that she's sleeping with, his secretary basically corners her and confronts her with the information that he's been doing this with girls for years now, and that she herself was one of them. And watching Shirley MacLaine react it's such a, like, it was almost cringy. Like, it was like watching those really hard to watch episodes of The Office in some ways, because she plays it so naturally. Like, she's trying to laugh it off and she's turning her head away and saying like, you know, you have to excuse me. And it's the way she embodies the embarrassment. It's so perfectly done that you like I said, I forgot I was watching an actress at some point. And that, I think, is the highest compliment I can possibly give to somebody.
Well, and when you talk about authenticity and this ability, you know, like you said, of Shirley MacLaine to just keep the audience drawn in with just how real her performance is, I think you have Fred MacMurray as the foil to that, of just being the most sleazy, over-the-top villain that I think that this movie kind of needed. Like, with all of the groundedness of the other characters, I don't think it would have served the film to have a executive who genuinely had a terrible marriage and was like genuinely struggling and all this. Like, it really needed to have a corporate high-powered, honestly, in a certain sense, no-name nobody who's just out for his own. Well, and I thought that Fred MacMurray was great at that.
I completely agree. And I'm going to say that it's going to sound like an insult, Brad, but I hope you understand what I mean when I say this. I think it actually benefited the movie to have Fred MacMurray in this role, because he is not as good of an actor as the other two. Like, in the late 50s, early 60s, you really started to see some of these older actors who had been, you know, making movies in the 30s and 40s started to be in films with these people that were coming out of the actor studio in New York and were into method acting. And it was like watching two completely different clashing styles of acting on screen. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it was really obvious. And I think this is one of those times where, you know, Fred MacMurray is just kind of a wooden actor. He doesn't have a lot of range. And I thought that worked really well in Double Indemnity when he's playing this hard-boiled kind of guy. And here it works really well too, because, you know, we keep using the word, but he's just a dick. And he plays the dick really, really well, but he doesn't overdo it. And I think there are a lot of people who would have either tried to play it too naturalistically or tried to play it too hammy, and he doesn't do either one of those things, and I think the movie really benefits because of that.
Honestly, I think one of the scenes that illustrates that movement or that almost the baton being passed from Fred MacMurray's generation onto Jack Lemmon's generation is the very final scene between the two of them when Jack Lemmon quits. There's this one singular moment that I just loved where where Fred MacMurray goes, "Now I thought you were a bright man, see? I thought you were understanding your place in this world, see? You just give me the key right now, you see?" And
Sorry, Mr. Sheldrake.
What do you mean, sorry?
You're not going to bring anybody to my apartment.
I'm not just bringing anybody, I'm bringing Miss Kubelik.
Especially not Miss Kubelik.
How's that again?
No key.
Baxter, I picked you for my team because I thought you were a very bright young man. Do you realize what you're doing? Not to me, but to yourself. Normally, it takes years to work your way up to the 27th floor. But it only takes 30 seconds to be out on the street again. You dig?
I dig.
he looks up into Jack Lemmon's eyes, and obviously I'm exaggerating some, but he goes, "You dig?" And Jack Lemmon goes, "Oh yeah, I dig." And like, it just felt like this like symbolic moment of like, "You dig?" was a terrible, terrible line. And like the way Jack Lemmon just throws it back at him casually, I just felt like that was a moment where I was just like, oh, I love every second of this.
There was a moment in this movie, and you know, we'll censor this for the wide release, but Patreon, you'll get an earful here. There's a moment where I just looked at the screen and I, under my breath, there's no one else in the room. I was just like, oh, you mother, like I said it out loud to the screen, and it's the moment where Sheldrake, Fred MacMurray, and Miss Kubelik are in the apartment together for the first time, and she gets him a Christmas present, and it's a recording. It's an LP of the pianist in the restaurant that they go to, and the first thing he does is he says, "Well, you know, we better leave that here," meaning I can't take this home to my wife. I'll have to explain things. And she goes, "Yeah, we better leave it here." And then he says, "Well, you know, I didn't get you anything, but here's $100. And he pulls a $100 bill out of his wallet. And the way they frame it, Brad, they cut back to her on the couch, and it is like at eye level with her sitting on the couch. So you basically just see like Fred MacMurray's waist. And you just see this $100 bill kind of like fall into frame while she's looking at him with this look of just utter contempt and
Yep.
hatred. And it was the most crushing thing to watch him drop this $100 bill at her. It basically as a way of saying, like, you are nothing but a cheap whore to me. And it, like, that scene and the way they framed it visually, I think will forever be burned in my mind.
And the way that she stands up and like takes her coat off, and he just goes, "Oh, well, we don't really have any time for that." And she, I don't remember exactly how she says it, but she basically says, "Well, if you already paid for it, I figured I might as well seal the deal."
Yeah.
And you're just like, "Oh man."
Yeah.
And he just kind of goes, "Oh, don't talk like that. Okay, bye."
Right. Yeah. All three of them are great in this movie. Brad, I don't think we're saying anything like revolutionary here. This movie is really good. The acting is phenomenal. The script is great. The direction is fantastic. I think it's time for us to hit pause and drink some whiskey. So what do you say we sip on some single malt scotch and try this Bunnahabhain 12?
Yes, let's drink it.
All right, today we are checking out Bunnahabhain 12 year. Brad, this might be the most fun to say name of any whiskey we've ever had on this show. I love the Scottish people and their names. And this one, Bunnahabhain, is one that I'm going to say at least 50 times in this segment. So just prepare yourself.
I don't know, man. The nectar de might have been. That might be our best. We probably should run a segment on Instagram with just the best names of whiskey of all time.
That's true. Brooklotic is right up there too.
That's right, man.
All right, so Bunnahabhain 12 year is an interesting whiskey. Brad, this is an Islay Scotch, and as we know, Islay Scotches are usually very heavily peated. Think Laphroaig. But Bunnahabhain goes an opposite route. They really don't heavily peat their Scotch at all. In fact, as I'm nosing this, I'm not getting any peat at all, so it may be completely unpeated for all I know. This particular expression of Bunnahabhain 12 was kind of revamped back in the year 2010. They upped the proof on it to 46.3%. So we're looking at basically a 92.5 proof whiskey here. It's non-chill filtered, and they have not added any coloration to it. One thing we've really never talked about on this show is that unlike bourbon, with Scotch, they can actually add caramel coloring to Scotch whiskey to make it look darker in the glass, and it doesn't affect anything they have to put on the label. It's still considered Scotch. So there's actually been a pretty big movement in the Scotch world to stop doing that and just present, the whiskey the way that it's supposed to look in the glass. So it has a much lighter look in the glass, but that's just because they haven't added any coloration to it.
Dude, they just need to listen to the Beatles, man. Let it be.
Let it be, man.
Let it be.
That's right. And there's our copyright strike for this episode.
Kaboom. You're welcome.
Well, Brad, let's get into drinking this. I'm really excited. This is the second week in, 3 weeks now, Brad, that we are drinking Scotch. So I'm excited to get back into drinking some single malt Scotch whiskey. What are you picking up on the nose of this Bunnahabhain 12 year?
Honestly, I think that you can still get a little bit of that smoke. And it's not, I'm not calling this a peated Scotch, but there's a little bit of that smokiness. For me, it's actually coming across a little bit alcohol forward. And there's some hints of saline, flowers, and a little bit of just generic sweetness. But yeah, it's a nice, pleasant smelling nose that I'll give a 7 out of 10.
Are you ready for this, Brad? Because a couple weeks ago, we did Aberlour 16 and Aberlour 18.
And while I remember.
Yes. And while I liked both of those whiskeys, you were much more, effusive in your praise. And I was a little bit more reserved. And Brad, I think the tables are going to be turned this time because I went ahead and took all my notes on this already. I love this whiskey. I love it, Brad. This nose is beautiful. I mean, if you just kind of let it air out a little bit in the glass, because it's been in our sample bottle for a while, it has layers of butterscotch and caramel. You can get a little bit of that malt on it. But for me, it was stone fruit. I got a lot of peach on this. I got dark chocolate notes just on the nose of this. I found this to be incredibly complex. It's still very light. And you can tell, like you said, Brad, that there is some alcohol on it. I didn't find it to be offensive. I didn't find it to be alcohol forward. I love this nose. I'm actually going to give this an 8.5 on the nose, Brad.
Yeah, that is pretty high up there, and a lot of words that you just said. But when I get into the taste, I think that, honestly, it's kind of at a similar point for me. There's a few hints of vanilla that are kind of underwritten by a really strong saline taste that I'm getting. I'm not getting blown away by any one particular note. It's kind of vaguely sweet and kind of pleasureful, and so I'll call it a 7 out of 10.
One thing that I've been doing the last few weeks, Brad, when we're tasting whiskeys, especially because, sometimes we record right after dinner, we might have some funky tastes still on our palates. I had Chinese food tonight, so I was like, I got to find something to reset my palate here. I have a very standard bourbon and a very standard Scotch that I just take, like a thimbleful, basically, just to kind of get acclimated to the flavor of Scotch again before I dove into this one. And so for me, it's Cutty Sark, which is not a very good Scotch. And, it's just, hey, here's alcohol and maltiness, and there you go. And I followed it with this about 10 minutes later. Brad, for me, this was very sweet right from the jump. I thought it was sweet with just a hint of that saline you're talking about. It had a really nice spice on it. When I breathed out afterwards, I had nutmeg and clove. I just really thought that it's not a complex flavor, but there is just layers and layers of richness to this, man. Like, I got a ton of brown sugar, I got a ton of butterscotch, and yet it still stayed very, very light on the palate. This is one of the best Scotches I've had on this show in probably 2 seasons, Brad. Like, thinking back, the only ones that really stand out to me that I liked immediately better than this were Quinta Rubin and Lefroy Glore. I'm going to give this a 9.5 on the palate.
Dude, I think you need to start writing some copy for Bunnahabhain. You are all about this stuff. Like I said, it's fine. It's just not blowing me away in any way. I think when I get to the finish, it's a little bit nutty kind of on the finish, with a little bit of that floral aroma coming through. It's a solid finish. But once again, nothing that's blowing me away. I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I think if there is one area where this is not great, it's the finish. It's a bit more of just kind of a standard scotchy finish. Oak. It actually soured for me a little bit on the finish. And then I got quite a bit of smoke on the back end, Brad. So you're right. It is lightly peated, I think. It definitely carries a smokiness with it. But overall, still pleasant. Not alcohol forward, not harsh. It doesn't dry the mouth out. It was definitely mouth watering. I thought it was a good finish. Like you, I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, and that brings us to our overall balance. I think this is a well-balanced whiskey. I personally, though, just feel like there's a need for more complexity here that I was not getting. So I'm just going to stick right where I'm at, man. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. It's solid. It's just not blowing me away.
I think this is a beautiful whiskey. Like, it would not be very often that I would use the word beautiful to describe a whiskey. And I think in some ways we have been a little bit spoiled because a lot of the scotches we've been trying, Brad, have been finished in other types of casks to give it a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more maturity. So, like, I don't know if I would stack this right next to a Glenmorangie Quinta Rubin because that has a very particular flavor that's been sort of, I don't want to say added to it, but, infused into it. And if you lined this up next to like a regular Glenmorangie, like I know that's a Highland, not an Islay, but this thing has so much more depth, so much more richness. It's very sweet. It's really decadent. I would choose this over like a Glenmorangie 10-year any day of the week. I think it's incredibly well balanced. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 on the balance.
I mean, I don't mean to throw you under the bus here, but this is double matured in ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks.
Right. But that is essentially what most scotches do. Like we did that with Aberlour a couple weeks ago. Ex-bourbon barrels and ex-sherry butts are pretty much the standard for maturing scotch.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just not getting what you're getting, Bob. I just think it's kind of blandly sweet and has a few interesting notes, and it's just okay. And that's when we get to the value, this sells for $55 and, confusingly enough, 83 cents in the state of Ohio.
I don't understand that price.
Because then just make it 55. No, 83.
I wonder if that works out to be like an even number when they add tax onto it or something.
I mean, maybe. Yeah. But like, what happens when they change the tax rate?
Right, exactly.
I love when you find little anomalies like that. But honestly, for me, when you have a world with Quinta Rubin for like $5 less than this, I just can't consider this a great value. Like, it's fine. It's good. I would drink it if it was offered to me. But at $56, I can only give it a 4 out of 10 on value.
A 4 out of 10?
Yeah. Like, it's just... I can't... I've said this a million times already, Bob. It's just fine.
Yeah.
It's good.
Interesting.
But in the world of scotch for me, I'm only going to buy a scotch if I'm just really blown away by it. And I really like scotch. And so, even at the $50, $60, $70 range, unless it's blown me away, I don't want to spend that much money, man.
I mean, I will say that I think this has a ton more character, a ton more sweetness, a ton more flavor than the Aberlour 16 that we tried 2 weeks ago. Like, I think this would stack up. If we did these side by side again, I actually would venture to say that you might pick this over the Aberlour 16. And again, we're comparing different regions of Scotch here, Speyside to Islay. But for me, Brad, I really do think that at this price point, the only Scotch, I should say, that I think is a better value is the Quinta Rubin. And Ohio has actually raised the price of Bunnahabhain and lowered the price of Quinta Rubin. So I would say a year ago, you could flip-flop the prices of the two. This would have been about $5 cheaper, at least, than the Quinta Rubin. Brad, for me, I think it's a 9 out of 10 on value. This is one of the better scotches that I can think of for $55 or less. And we are going to come out in extremely different places on this whiskey. I'm coming out to a 43.5 out of 50 on this.
Yeah, Bob, I am coming out to a 32.5 on this.
All right, so that is bringing us out to a 76 out of 100 or a 38 out of 50. So it is over that 35 mark where we typically say that it's worth trying, it's worth buying. I actually would say that in the rarest of instances, for me being the cheapskate that I am, I would recommend both. I think it's worth buying a bottle of this at $55. I would absolutely recommend trying it at a bar because it's going to be less than $10 to try this. Brad, where would you come out in terms of recommendations?
Yeah, no, just sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to try it, that's fine. I don't think it's particularly worth grabbing, but go for it if you want to.
Would you recommend someone to try this at a bar, or would you say pass on it altogether?
Honestly, Bob, there's very few whiskeys that I would say don't try it.
Got it.
But honestly, there's probably maybe out of all the whiskeys we ever drank, there's probably only 10 to 15 that I'd be like, man, I would even pass on it at the bar.
I get that.
So yeah, I'd say go for it. Like if you enjoy scotch, if you enjoy especially sweet scotch, go for it. Yeah, it's solid. It's a good pour. But overall, buying a bottle, no, not as much.
All right, man. So we're divided on that one. Hopefully we're not too divided on our movie of the day. So what do you say we get back into talking about The Apartment?
Let's get to it. All right, that was Bunnahabhain 12, a whiskey that Bob and I are pretty daggone split on. We don't often come out 11 points away from each other on our whiskeys.
Yeah, man, I was really shocked to see that.
Yeah, it was fine. It was fine. But honestly,
oh my gosh, Brad, it was really good.
It was not.
And if you say fine one more time. Hey, Brad, I just have to double check my notes here. Was it fine?
It wasn't fine. It was just fine,
Do you remember the episode of How I Met Your Mother where Robin keeps talking about that painting of lilies that's hanging in the
Yes.
coffee shop?
Yes.
She goes, "Oh, it's really neat. The colors are neat." And Ted's like, "I'm sorry, just to clarify, would you say that it's more neat or neato burrito?"
Yeah, man.
That's where I'm at with this, Brad.
This whiskey was neato burrito, Bob.
All right, man, let's get back into talking about The Apartment.
Dude, I have a burning thought on my mind that's been sitting on me since I was like, I don't know, about an hour into the film.
Oh, is this a scorching hot Brad G take?
Jim Carrey modeled his whole acting career off of trying to be kind of like Jack Lemmon.
Oh, man. Brad, listen to me. Like 100% agreement with you. Like, if you listen to the way Jack Lemmon kind of mumbles some of his lines in this movie, like when he's depressed or when he's drunk, it is Jim Carrey's whole performance in Eternal Sunshine. Like,
Yes.
he is trying to do that. Yes, dude.
Yeah, 100%. And like the physical characteristics that he has, like when we haven't even talked about this part of the film, and I think it's brilliant. The one time that Baxter tries to get a woman, and it's a married woman, and he's like, you're worried he's about to dive into the vein of sleazy, high-powered executive. That moment, he turns on the music and he's kind of dancing around the apartment, is the moment where I was like, oh, it's Jim Carrey. Like the way he was moving around the apartment, I was just immediately like, oh, it's Liar Liar, it's Bruce Almighty, it's everything I've ever seen Jim Carrey. And honestly, like, this is not a knock on Jim Carrey. I really like him as an actor.
Oh, for sure.
But I just was struck by the comparison in my brain. It just popped in.
Dude, I'm going to share maybe the nerdiest story I can share with you. And when you've seen as many movies as I've seen, like my brain constructs like pretend remakes of movies. And I think sometimes, like, if they were ever going to remake this, who would I want to be in it? And we actually played this game a little bit with, I think, The Great Escape, way back in season 1. So when I first saw this movie, I was in high school. So it was around 2004, 2005. This movie called The Terminal had just come out with Tom Hanks. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a Spielberg movie. And the lead actress in that movie was Catherine Zeta-Jones. And she was playing a flight attendant who was having an affair with, I think, a pilot or something. Like, that you never see the guy in the movie. But she played, to a T, the Shirley MacLaine part of this movie. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like, Catherine Zeta-Jones might be a few years older than Shirley MacLaine was at this point. But I was like, if they ever wanted to remake The Apartment, like, you have Jim Carrey and 2004 era Catherine Zeta-Jones, like, right there for the taking. And I'm pissed in retrospect that no one read my mind and made that remake.
Bro, I'm telling you, man, once we start the Film and Whiskey studio, we will just make all of those remakes that we've always wanted to make.
We're just going to cast them as 65-year-olds.
Yes.
And just do it anyway.
Yeah, Jim Carrey will be lights out.
Wow, Brad, I'm really happy that you noticed that as well, because I have been thinking that to myself for like, what, 15, 16 years now.
Is that also what you yell at people on the street?
I do. I shake them and I say, why are you remaking
Jim Carrey?
Why aren't you remaking The Apartment?
I just have this image of you being George Bailey running down the snowy streets of Akron, shaking people.
Yeah, like when he's accosting the pretend version of Mary that's coming out of the library and like trying to kiss her. I'm that version.
Don't you see? Jim Carrey is Jack Lemmon.
Oh, man. Brad, I think this is a good time for us to move into our final scores. And I am interested to hear what you have to say here, because at the beginning of the episode, you said that you thought it was a really solid movie, that it was in the top, 20% kind of a thing. It doesn't sound like you're ready to go all in and give it like a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10. So share your final score with us, but also can you enlighten me a little bit on what you think might be some of the flaws or the drawbacks of the movie here?
I do think that there are a few points throughout the film where it drags a little bit. Like, the moment at the start of the movie when he's making all these phone calls to the different guys to try and reschedule dates, like it's a gag and it's funny, but it kind of drags a little bit. And there was just one or two other moments throughout the movie where I just felt myself wanting a little bit faster of a pace, and not in a comedic sense, just in a genuine, like, okay, let's get to the next part. Like we need to keep moving. But overall, I really don't have much to complain about this film. I think it's really solid. I'm going to compare it to Some Like It Hot again, because I gave Some Like It Hot a 10 out of 10. And I think, I'm going to give The Apartment a 9 out of 10. I think the reason that it's not getting a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10 for me is the fact that, like, in the vein of comedies, I think Some Like It Hot just stands head and shoulders above most any comedy ever written, directed, acted, filmed. Like, it is so far above that for me, it's just a 10 out of 10. And I honestly think that The Apartment might be the better movie overall. But in the end, there are a lot of really beautiful dramas out there that I can compare this to and go, yeah, this is like one of the better entries in the heartfelt, meaningful drama department with a little bit of comedy thrown in. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And I get your critique. When we watch the movies for the podcast, you and I both take notes while we're watching the movie. And I will freely admit that there were a couple parts of the movie that I found it more convenient to take notes during. So you're right. There probably is. And it's not very much. Like, if they trimmed maybe even like 3 minutes off the runtime, I think it would be a little bit tighter. But for me, it's just like, man, this movie hits a level of emotional depth that I don't think has really been surpassed in some ways by movies that have tried to do it since then. And the scene that I was talking about earlier, Brad, that I called a really harrowing sequence is that whole sequence in Jack Lemmon's apartment after he discovers that Fran has, tried to overdose on pills. He calls the doctor over and they have to basically keep her from dying the whole night. And Wilder just puts us in that apartment and does not shy away from the horrible after effects of, the actions of this dick, Sheldrake. And watching that sequence, I was reminded of a very similar sequence in the movie Almost Famous, which we're going to be reviewing here in just a few months. And Brad, you've seen the director's cut of that movie, so you've at least seen that scene before. But, a main character in that movie tries to commit suicide. They have to pump her stomach out. It's very similar to The Apartment. And yet that movie cuts away way quicker than this one does. And I'm not saying that just, forcing people to watch something harrowing makes it better. But I think that it's really a testament to how well made this movie was, that in 60 years, I don't know if that scene has been topped in terms of what they're trying to do. And so for all those reasons, for the reasons of, it being a comedy and a tragedy and a romance and working at all three, it's a nearly perfect movie for me. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10.
Honestly, Bob, I was worried that you were going to mention Pulp Fiction there when you're talking about overdosing scenes.
Oh, gosh, not that one. Not that one.
But honestly, I will say there was a moment when the doctor was just slapping her that I was worried that like a 2021 viewer might watch that and just think that it's like over the top and, abusive and unnecessary. And I will say this, as somebody who has watched people had their stomachs pumped and been brought back from the brink of death, after suicide attempts or alcohol poisoning or things like that. Nah, dude, that doctor was being gentle.
Yeah.
Like being 100% honest. Like that, I mean, it was a gruesome scene. It was brutal. It was honest. And that's what I really loved about it. Once again, this movie is not shying away from the reality of what's happening when these, sleazeballs are just taking advantage of women.
Well, on that really happy and shiny and positive note, we would like to hear what you think about this movie. I mean, Brad, I assume 9 out of 10 you gave it. You're going to recommend that people should go watch this movie.
Oh, yeah, dude. I mean, if you can get it at a bar, if you can, just get a shot. Oh, sorry, we're talking about the movie. Yeah, you should you should totally watch this movie, Bob. It's great.
And if you have seen the movie, or if we have persuaded you to go watch it, hit us up after the fact. You can find us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @FilmWhiskey.
Honestly, Bob, I'm just going to make another pitch. Don't go see All About Eve. I just want to remind everybody that is not a movie worth watching. Whereas The Apartment is eminently a better film and much more worth watching than All About Eve. So now that public service announcement is over, if you want to give us some feedback, verbally, auditorily, give us a phone call. You can leave us a voicemail on our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Brad, I am ready for this with every ounce of my being. Next week, we're coming at you with the only movie to this day to feature a man free-falling and bouncing off a propeller into icy cold waters. 1997's Best Picture winner, Titanic. I cannot wait. I will see you next week, Brad, as we discuss that masterpiece. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I genuinely had no idea what movie you were talking about.
Wouldn't it be funny if I just said like Happy Feet or like anything else like cold themed? Like
yes.
The Santa Claus.
Yes. Oh, man. I am Brad G. And guys, I'm so pumped for next week. Titanic should be a great time.
We'll see you next week.